Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and based on that intro, which was incredibly fun to make, I might add, you probably guessed that this video is all about what we can do to counter and kill the Wiesel 1A1 tow. Whenever you're trying to compete against something, whether it be in a video game, or in a sport, or any other aspect of life really, you need to know what you're up against. You need to know what the strengths and weaknesses of your adversary are. I've done a video on how to play the Wiesel, and in that video I covered many of the strengths of the vehicle, because if you want to play it right, you need to know what the strengths are. That does not mean that it has no weaknesses. First off, let's talk about the weaknesses of the Wiesel. First of all, the Wiesel, it cannot aim behind itself. Despite the fact that it's maneuverable and it's well concealed and it hits very hard, it cannot aim behind itself. The ATGM launcher has 45 degrees of traverse left and right. This means that if you want to be 100% safe, sit behind it. This traverse limitation on the Wiesel's ATGM launcher, when you combine that limitation with the need to lead ATGM shots, which is a pretty standard part of this game, it's a pretty standard mechanic. You do have to lead ATGM shots, not just for the Wiesel, for every other vehicle that fires them. When you combine the limited traverse with the need to lead the shot, you end up with a vehicle that isn't as easy to aim and hit consistently as you might think. If you want to be safe, all you need to do is get yourself outside of the potential hit area that the Wiesel has. Now, that's great and all. It's easy to say stuff. It's sometimes, you know, it's easy to say something. It's difficult to actually go and do it. So, how can you do that? When I say just sit behind it or sit outside of its hit cone, I suppose you could call it, that's easy. That's all well and good. But how do you actually do that? Well, Era 3 is different to all the other eras in the game. Yes, the Wiesel is fast, but in Era 3, so is everything else. I've had no problem keeping up with the Wiesel in my BMP3, Bradley, M1A2, Type 90, T72BU, the list goes on. Speed, however, is not always enough. The Wiesel can change direction very, very quickly, and the only vehicle that can really keep up with it as far as maneuverability goes is the BMP3. So what do you do if you're in any other vehicle? The answer to that is the handbrake. The handbrake is incredibly useful, especially when you're in these large heavies, because while they're fast, they don't like turning, and the Leopard 2A5 is a very good example of a heavy that's fast but doesn't like turning. If you want to keep up with the Wiesel as it ducks and dives and weaves all over the place, using your handbrake is a very good way of staying on track behind it. Also, what you need to remember is you have an area, a 270 degree area behind the Wiesel, that it cannot traverse its gun into that area. All it has is the 90 degrees in front of it. So while you might not be as maneuverable in a heavy, or a medium for that matter, you don't need to be directly behind it at all times. All you need to do is just stay in this 270 degree area that it cannot get its launcher onto you as the target. If you can do that, there really isn't much a Wiesel driver can do. There are, of course, times where that isn't possible. I think everybody at some point is going to take a hit from a Wiesel, but keep in mind that it has a 21-second reload, which means that if its shot hits you and bounces, for example, that does happen, it's happened to me when I've been playing it, you have 21 seconds to reposition, maneuver, and figure out where it's going. Now, this Wiesel that I've been chasing here has done exactly what I would do. It's popped smoke. And another key to finding out what's happening with the Wiesel is the second it pops smoke, don't try and look for it on screen. Switch your eyes to your minimap, because that will tell you well, basically that will tell you exactly where it is, and that's exactly how I was able to keep up with this Wiesel as he went through his smoke. Alright, everything I've said so far applies to all vehicles. There are, however, some things I wouldn't recommend you do based on the vehicle that you are driving. I've played the Wiesel a lot, and I can tell you the most disruptive thing any player can do to a Wiesel is ram it. What I've found, though, is that this is a very good tactic for heavies. I do not recommend this for lights or mediums. Why is that? Well, it's likely that your ram will spin the Wiesel around. And remember, the Wiesel only has a 90-degree window from which it can shoot. And if you ram it and spin it around, you may have inadvertently opened that window and you'll take a hit. A BMP3 or a Type 88A is not going to bounce an ATGM shot from the Wiesel. The Merc 3 or Challenger 2, for example, they can probably survive a angled shot from the front. That said, all of this does assume a huge amount of skill on the part of the Wiesel player, because getting rammed is incredibly disorientating, and it doesn't often end well for the Wiesel. If you're in a medium or light tank, what I would recommend is use your speed and maneuverability to just stay behind them. For the most part, the Wiesel is an aggressive vehicle. You can see it being played at close range. It's got a shoot and scoot playstyle. Every now and then, though, you'll see one being played like a typical TD, sitting further back, taking shots while sitting stationary. These are prime opportunities for removing them from the game. If you see a Wiesel, or any other tank for that matter, sitting still and exposed, you take the shot, which is exactly what I was doing at the start of this video when you saw me taking those long range ATGM shots at those two Wiesels that were just sat at the back. You know, true vision's a thing. I used it and I was able to take shots and I was able to hit them. The Wiesel is certainly a game changer. It requires a new mindset for Era 3, which can be uncomfortable, but the Wiesel is not unbeatable. And like everything else, it has a weakness. All you need to do is understand those weaknesses and exploit them. Okay folks, that's about all I have for this one. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave it a like, if not a dislike. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and as always, I hope you're all keeping well, and I will see you out there.